Hey, Cheshire, hardly a day goes past when I don't get an email from someone who is filled with mental pressure. They say, I get these memory techniques, and I know I want to use memory palaces, but I have all these blocks. Either I don't have the energy, or I don't have the motivation, or I don't have whatever it takes to just get myself to follow that old advice. Just do it. What do you think they ought to do, Cheshire? Dude, I just make my head disappear and all my thoughts go with it. Ah, that's very helpful. Thank you. In all seriousness, I've been there. I have mental blocks even to this day when I sit down to do an ambitious memory project. I've memorized lots and lots of long-form Sanskrit. I've memorized a TEDx talk and so forth. And I have experienced the mental pressure of sitting down. I mean, when I sat for level 3 in Mandarin, it's just like, how am I going to do this? I was having to do it in very short periods of time to pass that test. The classes themselves were taking place in the evening when I'm tired because I get up at 4 a.m. and 6 p.m. you show up for a lesson. Like I'm just not at my best. And then the exam was also at 6 p.m. And so it's not easy to ignore the mind going yap, yap, yap. Oh, I have to do a memory palace. And the mind is just going blah, 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 blah. So what I want to share with you today are some things that I've learned over the years about redirecting thought patterns and using what you might call cognitive shifting. And it is a very powerful thing to do to help reduce stress, anxiety, overthinking, leading to greater mental clarity and so forth. And it taps into a principle that's very real in memory science called neuroplasticity that can help retrain the brain to focus on the positive, productive thoughts instead of stress-inducing thoughts. So you can sit down, create and use memory palaces, and memorize all kinds of information. However, we don't want to make it about the mind alone. So there's also physical considerations. There are dietary considerations. And in physics or the physical and in diets and in sleep and all that sort of stuff, you really want to approach things holistically. And I certainly do. If you've read The Victorious Mind, I talk about all the food journaling that I did, all of the elimination diets I did, etc. All that stuff you got to go and inform yourself about and talk with a doctor about. And any kind of activity, either mental or physical, you've got to run it past a professional because it might not be for you. And I want to share these things that have just helped me a lot because I get so many questions about it. And also just simply keep in mind that it is not just one thing. There's no one solution theory here. It's many, many things. And if you're going to get into this kind of changing how your mind works and how that it really involves interrupting negative thought loops and encouraging your brain to reframe and even create new neural pathways, do your research, do your due diligence. I talk about a lot of the research in The Victorious Mind, so read that, but also read the additional research. And you might be thinking, come on, buddy, just get to the point and give me the goods and all that sort of stuff. But no, and 1,000 times no. Content may be king, but context is God. So you really want to make sure that you are getting things done from the foundations and build up. So make sure you're speaking with a doctor because you may have thyroid issues. You may have all kinds of things that none of what I'm going to say today will address appropriately, right? And the only reason why I think that I've gotten such a bang for my buck with the kinds of mental techniques that I have learned to do over the years is because I did it holistically. I didn't require it to be just the mind alone. And the other thing to understand is that when I learned about the memory palace technique originally, I was doing my PhD, and part of what I was doing in my PhD, I was researching friendship, and I took certification in hypnotherapy, and so I was learning a lot about self-hypnosis, which is kind of like self-guided meditation. So I had this kind of relaxation kick that I was already going into when I started with the memory palace technique, but that did not stop me from having all kinds of negative thought patterns and all kinds of objections, and quite frankly, the objections still arise to this day. So I'm working with memorizing the Joyi right now. I'm not sure I pronounced that right. I Ching, you would normally call it, but Joyi is just a really wild thing. I think it's 64 hexagrams, and then there's trigrams that are built out of it. And this is for another book that I'm working on to follow the victorious mind. If you know that, I like to I've learned to not judge all kinds of things out there, but literally try them by absorbing them and memorizing them. And I just learned so much. That in itself reduces my stress in life and helps with a little bit of emotional regulation. Because if you've seen my TEDx talk, you know, like I used to fly off the wheel and put down the hammer, and I was so angry about certain ideas in the world. And so working with these things just helped with improving my assessment of the world, and that reduced stress unto itself. So being open to exploring things is itself a little bit of a suggestion, but it doesn't make the mental objections go away. Because I look at this and it's like, whoa, 64 hexagrams? I have to memorize the word hexagram, and I have to learn what a trigram is, and then I have to think, okay, so the first one is chin, and that's the second tone, and did I say the second tone correctly? Like, it's just, you could easily overwhelm yourself if you don't use the tools that we're going to talk about today. So I know that's a lot of things that people in the world are going to judge as fluff and bump and just get to the point kind of stuff, but actually this stuff is the point. Context is the point. And if we don't have enough of it, then we're just robbing from ourselves the glory of the specific details. So we're going to get into some, so to speak, cognitive shifting exercises today. If you're new here and you want to go on the deepest, context-driven, nuanced journey into improving your memory, then make sure you're subscribed. Hit that thumbs up for the love of memory. Thank you to everybody who's been part of this journey for any period of time. And let's get started with the first cognitive shifting exercise. Okay, so I got into this realm of the kingdom, which is the idea that you could actually stop your thoughts and interrupt a negative thought as soon as it occurs. And in The Victorious Mind, I share the whole history of how all that happened. It's in my TEDx talk. But the real idea here is that you want to recognize that you're having a negative or unhelpful thought, and then you want to mentally say stop to that. Now, the way I learned how to do it was to use a Sanskrit phrase, which is neti neti. And neti neti means, as far as I understand the translation, not this, not that. Now, you may not want to learn the Sanskrit. I don't know why you wouldn't. It's cool. But neti neti can have an English version, like stop. And you could just imagine a giant stop sign in front of you when negative thoughts arise. So the negative thought might be, man, creating this memory palace, that's just too hard. It takes too much focus, too much concentration. Well, it may in the beginning require a lot of focus and concentration, but really at the end of the day, I rarely spend more than 2 to 5 minutes on any individual memory palace. For the Joyi, for example, the I Ching, I really didn't spend a lot of time on the memory palace, and I've already got 5 of them memorized out of the 64. If I remember correctly that it's 64, right? So all I did is just sketched it out. I don't think I spent 2 minutes on this, and it's a full memory palace, and I just, this is the part I'm working on, break it down, and then I'll go into this part and this part and this part. I can go for on and on and on about why this memory palace is here. It's a Z memory palace. Zoltan was my boss at a movie theater where I was a janitor. Can you believe that once upon a time I was a janitor? Man, I must be devoted to getting through university. But anyway, I cleaned this movie theater night after night after night after night. In this particular cinema, I saw the Titanic sink, I don't know how many times, probably 60 times, because it was in the theater for 3 months at least. And I used to show up and at work just in time to watch, stand at the back of the room and watch that Titanic sink. Anyway, I'm using this memory palace now because the boss's name was Zoltan. The task is Joyi, to remember this, the I Ching. And so I just start. Now, there's logical principles that I have in terms of how I construct memory palaces, why I'm starting here instead of there, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that I still have mental blocks sometimes because it's like, whoa, 64, that's a lot of stuff, right? But I just push through it using neti neti. Not this, not that. This is what I want. I want to be with the tradition. I want to use memory palaces. I want to make them in as quick a period as possible. And because I just practice the practice, why am I still having all of this? Well, there can be lots of reasons why the mental objections still happen. Being tired, being overwhelmed by the fact that, let's call a spade a spade. 64 is not 2. It's a lot, right? So That's one thing, is to say neti neti, not this, not that. Or you could say stop and imagine a giant stop sign. Another one you could think of is cancel, cancel. And that's just a one that I've used a lot. And, there's the opposite of this. So when I get myself to take action, I give it a positive response as well. You could think of it as a reward. And so when I notice that I'm in flow and I'm taking action and I'm like, Qian, oh, that's the first one. Yeah. And Kun, that's the second one. And Tun is I think that's second tone, Tun, that sort of thing. And then it's Meng and then Shu. Like those are the 5 that I've memorized so far. And my tones might not be right and I have to go and fix all that. But anyway, the thing is if I check what I just recited there and I'm correct, then I say deepen, deepen. That is a way of feeling even better because of the win. And if there's a mistake, I don't punish. No. I just say cancel, cancel, or neti, neti, or stop, right? So that's a strategy. Another way of thinking about it that can be very, very powerful is snap your fingers. There's that thought again, stop, 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 or tap your hand on a surface or whatever, right? And your goal is just to replace the negative thought with a positive or a neutral one. So if it's like, I can't do this, you change it to, I will focus on what I can control right now. And the beauty of the way I teach the memory stuff in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass is that it just comes down to a pen and some paper. Can you scratch lines as simply as I do on a piece of paper? I believe you can. And if you can't, I have a video on the YouTube channel where I talk about what you can do if you can't draw, because people have emailed me and they're like, well, I am in a wheelchair and I can't use my hands. So what do? I cooked up some ideas for people and people really appreciated that. So you can watch that video. But at the end of the day, whatever your situation is, replace I can't with something that helps break the pattern and gets you focusing on what you can do. And, you may need to study Stoicism or something like that in order to get to that point, because there are many philosophical traditions, Stoicism being one of them. I don't think of myself as a Stoic. I always think of Nietzsche, who, I'm paraphrasing this into the form of a joke, but basically throughout Nietzsche, he says things to the effect that the problem with Stoics is that they believe in time, they believe in nature, they believe in God, and there's more than one of them. Anyway, the whole point is that you have options, and Stoicism would be one of them. And hopefully Nietzsche would be another, if you can find the time to get some stand-up comedy in your philosophy. But anyway, you want to just learn these techniques, repeat the process as needed until your brain starts to learn to automatically stop negative patterns. And that would be a procedural memory thing that starts to emerge. And when I got into these things, and this is, when I gave my TEDx talk, a lot of people said, what you're talking about is cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm like, cool, great. And why not? If that's what they teach in cognitive behavioral therapy, cool. I don't know that for a fact, but there's really dozens of comments to that effect. So the point is it becomes procedural by actually just doing it long enough that you build a kind of pattern in your memory. So it just sort of starts to fire automatically. And even though I don't do the snapping thing, one thing I do is called Kirtan Kriya, and it's just Satanama, Satanama. And you could do Ame Tofu, which is an Asian version. You can do 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, whatever. The whole thing is I've done that a lot to stop thoughts. I was doing that before I delivered my TEDx talk because thoughts wanted to rush in and discourage me and so forth. But I did more than that. I did some breathing and so forth. But I also was just doing my Kirtan Kriya. And it's beautiful. I didn't think. The thoughts were directed at the positive, or neutral in this case, because it really doesn't mean anything. You could learn the meaning of Satanama or Ame Tofu or 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, A, B, C, D. But my point is just to do rather than to have mental content that's discouraging me. And there is nothing really going on other than just repeating the mantra. Now, inevitably, there's going to be some people who say, well, how long should I do this per session? And I ultimately don't know, but you want to go for frequency. So whenever a negative thought arises, just practice daily if you can to build the habit of putting up the stop sign or whatever version of this that you choose. And you'll probably come up with your own ideas. But how often that you need to practice it every day, I really don't know the answer to those sorts of questions. That's going to be your adventure to find out. And I would say don't make it just about your mind. And again, this comes back to this principle of like holistic, everything all at once kind of thing. Like make sure your diet is being attended to, physical training, sleep, anything that may be medical that your doctor needs to check out, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why that is so super important is because there can be things going on where this kind of approach is not going to be the solution. But I think in many, many cases, this is going to really, really help and be pivotal to having not just a solution once in a while, but one that you can repeat over and over and over again to really start to live a different life. And just another thing around this that can help frame it so it gets into your procedural memory more is to do daily gratitude journaling. And all that really is just writing down, let's say, 10 things that you're grateful for. And you might be in such a situation in life where you think, well, I'm not grateful for anything right now. Everything is terrible. And if that's the case, then this should make it a little easier to do. If you're watching this, you can be grateful for the fact that you have a device that allows you to watch or listen to this program, right? That's one thing. That's one item. When I started doing this, I used to write down water, food, roof over my head, and on, right? Like there's no denying the greatness of all the things to be grateful for. There's people who have come before us and figured out indoor plumbing. Like take a second to be grateful for that, if nothing else. That's pretty amazing when you think about it. Okay, so that's a major, major approach here, is you start to practice the stopping of the thoughts and replace them with something else that's either positive or neutral. Our second exercise, when you're sitting down to use a memory palace, is to shift your perspective on whatever you're feeling in that situation so you can change how you interpret it. And the step-by-step instructions really are, you've got to identify the thought as the thing that's causing you stress or you're overwhelmed. So I'm overwhelmed by the idea of making memory palaces, or I have to memorize this. I'm overwhelmed by it. You know, you got to name it and challenge it. So this is where we're going to use a questioning process. And one thought you can think is this really true? Is this really overwhelming? What's another way to look at this? And so I often point out when people tell me they're so overwhelmed by creating a memory palace, and I go, okay, so this is a pen and then there's a piece of paper. That is overwhelming? I mean, what's another way to look at this? And could we think that we put on a clock and we say we're just going to spend a 10-minute period with a pen in our hands and a piece of paper? Can we do that? Is that possible? Is that a way that we can look at this? And, you know, I don't know the best way to do this, but inevitably, a lot of people tell me, yeah, you know, I feel kind of silly that I made such a big deal out of this. And I don't mean to make anybody feel silly, but when I do this to myself, I do admit, you know, that this is silly. I mean, I kind of am a little hard on myself sometimes, and I don't regret it. It's like, do or do not. There is no try. Yoda 101. Get up on your feet, man. But that's not necessary for everybody, and it doesn't necessarily help create a new narrative, right? So I've tried and learned over time to not be so brutal on myself, and it's helped. And I create new narratives by reframing the situation. So, you know, there's a lot of things that I do in order to do this video, in order to make that happen. And it's just mind-crushing in so many ways if I stop and think about it. And it's easy for me to say, I can't handle this workload. There's too many moving parts. There's so many details. But then I stop. You know, this is a challenge. There's no doubt about it. But I have historically tackled this for over 14 years now. And so how did I do it? Obviously, I can tackle this one task at a time. And then what I like to do is get out a journal and start to write down what's the problem here and reflect on how that I can change my feelings about it. And sometimes, you know, it's not as effective as other times, but it's always good to do the practice. And there's different ways that I approach it. So sometimes I'll just have pros versus cons and write a line down the middle and just list as many pros and cons as I can. And this itself helps change the perspective. So if I'm thinking, I can't do this new memory goal that I have, you know, it's so overwhelming, then I can go, well, what are the pros and cons? And the pros are, wow, I will know this material better. There's ancient wisdom in it. And I have all the pros of having done this with Sanskrit, where I can recite all kinds of Sanskrit from memory, even if it's just simple stuff like neti neti or satanama, instead of the whole jitameva mahadosham, jitameva hi balakaha, jitameva mahatmayam, jitameva mahanasat, and on and on and on and on, right? So it reframes it, and it also helps remind that we've done big things before. We've learned to tie our shoes. We've learned to brush our teeth, many of us. We have done things before, and this is simple. This is a walk in the park compared to a lot of these things. And another nuance here that I would add is that we often are applying our likes and dislikes to tasks, and we need to change our perspective as well. And one thing that I like to do and remind myself of, and I have to remind myself of it more often than I would care to admit, although I don't mind admitting it really, but it would be better if I didn't have to admit it, is that I have a like-dislike monster. Things come up in my mind where it's just like, I just don't like this, right? And then, I hate this, and rah, 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 rah. Well, in the Atmabodha, there is a phrase. It's the 50th verse, and I've memorized it, and it's Turtva Moharnavam Hatva Ragadveshti Rakshashan Yoga Shantasanta Yuktatma Ramo Varajate. Now, I may not have pronounced that correctly because I don't even know that I've heard it pronounced. I just memorized it the way that it seems to me that it should be in the Sanskrit. And the long and short of it is it basically says those who have defeated the like-dislike monster arrive at the ocean of tranquility, something along those lines. And that's really helpful because when I'm letting my perspective be on the, well, I like this or I dislike that beast of a monster, that's suffering. But when I can just call a spade and change the perspective and be like, man, it'd be really awesome to be beyond the like-dislike monster here, I think that's really cool. I'll be over here in the sea of tranquility or whatever, right? Moharn, I think the mo thing is what I believe is the word for ocean there. In any case, how long should you practice this? Well, you got to figure out what it is you're going to practice. But if you're going to do the pros versus con list or something like that, then 5 to 10 minutes a day for a problem is not too bad. And just every time a problem arises, start to get into that. The like-dislike monster thing, how often should you practice? I don't know. That's kind of a better response thing. So I wouldn't go out of my way to think, okay, so we're going to have the 1984 5 minutes of hate thing, and then we're going to practice the like-dislike monster destruction. No, that's kind of like inviting in the thing that I don't want at all, right? So I'd rather just wait for it to arrive and then tackle it. And how do I tackle it? Well, I just recite that verse, right? Or I first start with, neti neti, and then I may recite that verse mentally in my mind and so forth. Then there's the preemptive strike, which is just to sit down every day and do the mantra practice. Meditate, recite these mantras, and these mantras are filled with so much wisdom like this. Like in the Ribhu Gita that I learned from Gary Weber's Evolving Beyond Thought, one of the lines is that a real thought is as rare as a rabbit with horns. And it's so funny, right? And you just apply that kind of thinking, and you're just going to laugh at your negative thoughts, and it will change your perspective. What does it change it to? Well, it changes it from the idea that your thought is real to the idea that the very notion of thoughts being real is ridiculous. So our next exercise basically comes from ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. And your goal is to distance yourself from stressful thoughts and view them as temporary mental events rather than facts. This is kind of a variation on what we've already done, but basically you're going to try to recognize a stress-inducing thought, like, I will fail at this project. You want to visualize the thought in a very silly or exaggerated way. This massive failure taking place. So, I'm going to make a memory palace, and you think, oh, I'm just going to fail so badly at this. And then you make yourself as this giant cartoon character, and you've got thought bubbles floating away saying this ridiculous statement. You're going to fail at a thing you haven't even tried yet? This is hilarious. Now, this won't be for everybody, right? But if you're going to do it, and I've done this quite a lot, it's so helpful to just play cartoon versions of this negativity, right? And then say it out loud. Oh, I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail at something I haven't even tried yet, and it's just so funny. And then you go, yeah, if I fail, that's on me, not on the actual skill or the teacher or anything like that. And it can create distance from the thought. Now, You can change the colors, you can change the sizes, you can literally change the distance from you that the image is taking place. So you can have this animation really up close in front of your mental eyes, or you can see it way off in the distance. But the point is to acknowledge that your thoughts are not facts, and they do not have to dictate your actions or your emotions, and they certainly don't have to stop you from getting out a pen and a piece of paper, drawing your first memory palace, picking something you would like to memorize, and then memorizing it. The next exercise, and again, these are variations on the same thing, more or less, but to deliberately label your thoughts to prevent being overwhelmed by them. So you observe the thought as it arises, but without judgment, and you label the thought as closely as you can to an accurate statement of what it is and how it works. So you could be thinking about how you're planning to do 53 memory palaces, and you start to be overwhelmed because that's obviously a big number, right? So you call that planning or worrying or judging or problem solving, right? Now, problem solving is shifting your perspective to the positive, right? But what you're just doing is you're stripping out the emotions and you're calling it what it is, the name of the task. Avoid engaging with it. Avoid analyzing the thought. You're simply acknowledging it and labeling it, and this process will help let it go. Now, in my TEDx talk, many people have asked what the questions are. So I give you 2 questions in that talk that I just learned from Gary Weber. I misinterpreted part of his book, but in a good way. It was like the most fruitful mistake of my life. And basically, I translated some of the Sanskrit incorrectly, and I thought, well, these 2 questions I need to reflect on. I didn't translate it incorrectly. It's a long story, but basically, watch the TEDx talk and it'll explain everything. The idea is are my thoughts useful and how do they behave? And many people have asked, like, what does this mean? How do they behave? And what I believe it means is that you ask, how do they behave? And then you say, well, that's a childish thought. You may not want to denigrate yourself in that way, but I like to do that because in the Sanskrit, that's what it's saying. Chittameva mahadosham, chittameva hi balaka, chittameva mahatmayam, chittameva mahanasa. That's basically saying that a lot of thoughts run wild like a undisciplined little boy, right? So when I say, are my thoughts useful? How do they behave? I will call them out as being childish, if they are childish, but they might be something else. Like they might be scarcity. Well, that thought is coming from scarcity, or it's coming from fear, or it's coming from overwhelm, or whatever it is. But the granular detail here is to try to think, like, what is the intention of the thought? So, this whole thing, I've got to create umpteen memory palaces. What are you doing? Well, you're planning, right? Don't judge it. That is a planning thought. I have to do this thing. Or it's a goal thought, right? Whatever it is. And you can take the mental pressure off by just stripping it of its force. Just call it what it is. And your mileage may vary with this, but I found it quite useful myself. And I don't mind taking a jab at myself. Like, here goes silly little boy again, right? Like, well, let's man up a little bit. And that really helps me. So, give it a try, experiment, explore. And I think you'll find that this helps take away some mental pressure when the time is right for you to start using it. So far, everything we're discussing basically involves variations on mindfulness-based cognitive shifting, right? So you're using your mind in a particular way to address the stress-inducing thoughts in the present moment. But we can go a step further, and you can set some time aside to sit quietly and focus on your breath or some other point of focus. Like you could focus on the sounds around you. You could focus on the physical sensation of the floor beneath you. You can focus on the temperature. You could focus on something like an imaginary candle in front of you, or you could even put a candle in front of you that you look at. Check with your doctor if you actually want to make sure that it's okay to stare at candles. The point being is you could have all kinds of things. You could have a photograph of someone you admire or whatever. You could have a painting, any sorts of thing that helps you get a point of focus, that helps you notice your mind wandering, and then just notice your mind wandering, right? And you can gently bring your attention back to the point of focus. Bring it back to the breath. Bring it back to the painting or the photograph. Bring it back to the feeling of the floor beneath you without judgment. My mind wanders a lot. I sit here and I do my little chants, Carturagnia, Paraputafelum, and I'll notice that sometimes I get kicked off of it. And I don't judge it, right? I just observe, oh, I've shifted out of here. Or, sometimes I'll actually wind up in a little bit of a loop because they are quite complex, these mantras that I've memorized, and I'll sometimes realize that I've repeated a part. And I don't judge it. I just stop, find my way back, and I observe how my thoughts come and go while that I'm reciting these mantras, but I don't hold on to any particular one because my point of focus is the memorized mantra. And, how many minutes should you practice this kind of thing? I've seen research that says you're probably better off, or many of us are better off, with like 15-minute short focus blasts as opposed to 45-minute sessions. This is all personal decisions. There are people who say, no, and 1,000 times no, you will never have the effect of meditation if you don't do 45 minutes a day, etc. And I would say, I don't know the answer to that, because if I do 3 or 4 15-minute sessions, then I'm basically doing 45 minutes a day. But I rarely sit for longer than it takes to do 2 to 3 mantras that I recite. And they're between 6 to 10 minutes each. So sometimes I'll sit and just do one. So I may be sitting for 6 minutes. And it's just fine for me. I think less is more. In my case, your mileage is obviously going to vary. But I try to do this once or twice every day. I do it while I'm walking. I do these chants. So I'll be walking and I'll be doing this behind my back. And so not just Satanama, but the cool thing about the mantras that I've memorized is that they link. So I can do this while I'm walking silently in my mind and literally be doing this to be more bodily focused. Like it's both my mind and the physical sensation of touching my fingers in the Kirtan Kriya mudra, that I have a double whammy, a double point of focus. So just to give you an example of what that's like, it's like Chittameva Mahadosham, Chittameva Hi Balakaha, Chittameva Mahatmayam, Chittameva Mahanasa, Chittameva Hi Mithya Atma, Chittam Shashavi Shenava, Chittam Nasti, Siddha Satyam, Chittam Vandyaku Merava, Chittam Shunyam Na Sandeha, Brahma Eva, Sakalam Jagat, and on and on and on, right? Anyway, you can shift your life this way. Just start with 1 or 2 of the exercises that we've talked about today, or just find other exercises, because Mnemosyne knows that there is an abundance of exercises out there. Practice them consistently for a couple months, 90 days minimum at least, and keep a journal of what you're doing to keep track of all these techniques, and find out what your specific stress triggers are, what you get overwhelmed by. Approach each and every exercise with, wow, this is the cure for the cancer of the mind. And make yourself resonate with it if you have to, right? Because it's just so powerful to reframe negative thoughts, to label negative thoughts, to shoo them away and develop the skill of just not now, not this, not that, right? And you really have so many benefits, especially if you're using memory palaces and you're preparing for exams, or you want to learn a language and you need certificates in the language or whatever. Your mental resilience, your stress relief, your overall emotional well-being can shift, but never forget this core message. Do it holistically. This is a skill inside of a larger Lebensart, I think they say in German, an art of life, right? So your consistent effort and application is going to be strengthened by also working on your diet. It's going to be strengthened by also focusing on better sleep. It's all going to have this absolute wonderful self-reinforcing systematicity to it when you focus on all these different aspects, the wheel of life, so to speak. And there are actually wheels of life that people use in order to enable themselves to focus on the finance piece of life and the relationship piece of life and this and that other parts of life. The wheel of life is a thing, and it's a very powerful thing to focus on. There's another kind of wheel, though, and that's the memory wheel. And you can use the memory wheel for yet another point of focus exercise where you literally run through the alphabet in a circular formation in your mind. And every time that you hit the letter A and you have this little alphabet pill, letter A pill, boom, you take it, you think about A in a particular way, as I talk about in this training, you get a little bliss switch. And that is something I encourage you to watch from A to Z next. The memory wheel for conditioning your mind for maximum memory exercise benefits, and the positive overwhelm that you actually want in life. Thanks as always for watching. Get subscribed if you're not already. Hit that thumbs up so the robots never forget about the miracle of memory, and watch that video on the memory wheel for maximizing point of focus that leads to bliss next.